Hey everyone, in this part of the tutorial we're going to be extending what we did in the last part by building on our sign up form, and this one we're going to be doing a little bit more with the layout, and we're also going to be looking at what we need to do when we need to change an API at the back end. So let's get to it. Now often, rather than a single name field, most of the time we'll have a first name and a last name. Obviously we could have a company or a business name, but that's for a different step. But let's say that we want the first name and the last name on there. Let's say this is just something that we want to do. So there's a couple of things we're going to need to do for that. We're going to need to have another input box, ideally side by side rather than just one on top of the other. Okay, and what we'd also need to do is to look at the API, because at the minute we're going to sign up, we're just getting, it just expects a single name field. And if we look at the function stack, what we're doing now is we're getting the user from record. In this case, as opposed to the login, if that user email already exists, then it won't meet this precondition and it will fail. So what it's checking for here is, rather than to see that an email, a user record with the email that we passed in exists, this time we're making sure that it doesn't exist. And if it does, then we're saying add record in user. Okay, and if we just look into this step here, add record in user, it gives us a list of the fields that we're going to update when we create that, or rather create on our new record. So we're going to write to the name field, the email field, and the password field. So if we're going to have a first name and a last name, we're going to have to change a number of things. So let's just go through that process now. So I want to have a new input box. So let's come here to where we've got our name and the container that just holds both the name and the input field. Okay, I'm just going to do Command or Control D just to make a copy. So let's change the labels. This one is going to be first name. Put that in capitals there. And the next one is going to be last name. Right, okay, but we don't want the one on top of the other filling up the entire row. What we want is them side by side. So at the minute, everything is stacked one on top of the other. Now, why is it done that? Is that the default setting? Is that just done automatically? So if we come over here, let's say to our container that contains all of our form elements here, which is this div here. As we can see, it covers the entire block here that we've got with all of our different input boxes and labels in there. And if we look here against our div, we have this little visual clue that tells us that the blocks are stacked one on top of the other. Now this indicates that this container is what we call a column container. And what a column container signifies is that its content within the container is stacked one on top of the other. And if you look, each container below that that's contained within that is the same, is that they're column containers stacked one on top of the other, which is why the label is stacked on top of the input box. Now if I change one of these, let's say this one here, so that the label and the input box is displayed side by side, then what I can do is come here, click on that, over into styling, and I get this option here. And this is what we call the flex direction, sets how flex items are placed in the flex main axis. Okay, a little bit of a convoluted explanation for it, but essentially the fact that it's got an arrow down indicates that this is presently a column layout. So if we click that, we get a lot of options here. The main one we're interested in is the row and the column. Now if I just hover over the row, just look what it does to give you an indication, is it places the label and the input box side by side. So we don't want to do that here, but in order to be able to achieve the last name being displayed next to the first name, then we're going to need to have a container that contains both that is going to be a row container, so that they're displayed side by side. Okay, so what I'll do, I'll come here. So it's these two containers here. This one is first name, this one is last name. So I'll right click and I will say wrap in an element. I'm going to wrap it in a div element. Okay, and then now what I can do is just drag that last name inside of that new container. So I'm going to need to come over in this new container. I'm going to need to come over here and select for it to be a flex display. And then I got the option to pick the direction. And so in this one, I'm going to select row. And we can see what happens there is that now this container has two sub-containers. Each one now is displayed side by side because their container is a row container. And we can see again, it gives you a visual clue, which is side by side blocks. Okay, so we just need to add a little bit of a gap spacing here. In fact, what we really want to do is to make sure that they're effectively filling the whole space. You've got a little bit of a gap here at the end of that. So we'll come to the container of those two elements, and if we come over here, so where we've got this section here where we can line those, what we can do is tell it to effectively fill the entire space, or what we generally call space between. So we want a little bit of space between to then fill out the entire space and let it just deal with that automatically. So the way we can do that is we can come in here and we can just double click on this rather than just pick an option. We can double click on it. Okay, and we can see what's happened there is effectively we've created space between across. So whatever space is available in its container, its child elements then just spread to use the available space. So what that results in there is that we're filling the entire space with our two blocks. Okay, now if that's all a little bit too much, don't worry about it. We will go through this in more detail later, but at the minute just bear in mind that we've now created a row container which puts the content side by side, rather than what we were using before, which was always a column container where everything is displayed one on top of the other. Okay, so we've only done that for this one particular container, and we've put the first name container and the last name container into that parent container, and then by setting that to be row, then they display side by side, and then by double clicking on the alignment, then what we've done there is to just tell the two blocks that live within this container to use the available space, and that any gap that is between the two, rather than it being at the end, which would happen if we just did that, we're effectively saying put it between those elements. Okay, now obviously we've got Tom Smith, so at the minute we've just got one variable which is for name, so we're going to need to change that a little bit. So again, click off the canvas or press escape to get to the page settings. Let's add a variable and let's call this last name, and then give that initial value, and let's change the name that we had before. Let's change that to be first name. So we come to this one here, we go to attributes, then what we need to do is it's already selected to bind it to the first name. Okay, and then we need the placeholder to be first name. Okay, and then we can do the same thing here. This time we need it to bind it to the last name variable that we just created, so we'll select that. And let's just change the placeholder to be last name. Okay. Now we obviously then need to pass these into our API. So we go to our API, into our body, we can see that Xano is still expecting just one name value to be passed in as per this. We now want to pass in the first name and the last name. And so this is where we're going to need to make some changes to our back end. And first of all, we're going to need to change our user table, because at the minute we've only got a name field. We need a first name and a last name field. So what we can do here is I can come and I can select rename, and I'm going to rename this field to be first name, and let's save that. Yes. Now what it's recognized here is that that's going to affect quite a number of different APIs. The only ones we're really worried about are the login and the sign up. So it's just saying, do you automatically want to update the following references? And so let's just say yes and get that done. Let's get that out of the way for us, so we don't need to go through each of these and change it. Okay, and now we need to add a new field for our last name, and we just come here to this plus here, and now we can add the name. So we only want it to be a text field, we don't want any other details, so let's select text. Let's give it the name of last name. Let's make sure it's all in lowercase. We don't need a description, it's a single value. We don't really need any of these details really, we just need straightforward. Yeah, everything's good there, just leave everything as it is, and then let's click to add that column. Okay, and then we've got a new last name field. Okay, so with that done, let's go to the API, authentication and the sign up. Okay, so we're still getting asked for the name as an input, so we'll just change this one to be the first name. So let's click on this. Okay, and then we can rename it in here as first name. Okay, we can leave everything else as is. And again, it's going to say, look, there's things that are relying on the old name. Do you just want to update those references? So yeah, let's do it automatically. It's very handy that Xano does this for us. Okay, and then we just need to add an input for as a text value, and then we just need to say that we need that to be the last name, leave everything as it is, and add that input. So now we've got a first name and a last name input that this API is now going to expect. So if we go to this add record in user step here and we click on that, so it's done that for us. It's automatically added that in there so that the field last name in our user table that we've just added picks up on this new input that we've given it. And notice that the first name is now updated from name to first name. That happened when we said to update references. So that's all that we need to do there. So now we've made those changes, then we need to publish that change. Otherwise it's not going to run in our front end. That's an important step. You can run it here without publishing the changes so that we can test it if we need to. So we can run it and get these details in there. But to be able to make the changes available to the outside world, i.e. our front end, we need to click to publish it. So let's click that. Okay, and then our changes have been saved. So if we come back here to Nordcraft, so what we're actually going to need to do for it to pick up that name, we just need to add it ourselves. So we're going to need to add this to change this to first name, and we're going to need to add in our last name property and hook that up to the last name variable. Now we can go full screen with this formula editor by clicking this here, so we can see it all on one screen. And if we want our last name to go here, we can just click on this handle and just drag it under the first name if that's what we want to do. Okay, so we're all good to go. We've now made changes to our front end by putting our extra field in there, and we've also configured changes to our Xano backend API. So let's run that now and let's give that a go. Okay, so I'm going to need to obviously give it a different name this time. So there we go, and let's go Bill 100 at test.com, and then Bill Smith 100. Okay, and now let's click to sign up. you're signed up successfully. So let's go to the database and check that. Okay, there we go. There's our Bill, and then our last name, Bill Smith. Okay, so this is a little bit of an introduction into how to update your forms, add additional inputs into a backend Xano API, change what that API is going to do, and then send that additional information. So in the next video, we'll be looking at how we can link between the different pages. So at the minute, we've got the sign up page and we've got the login page. How do we link between the two so that a user can flip between the login and the sign up page if they need to? So thanks for watching. Appreciate you sticking with me. Don't forget that if you want to join the waitlist for my upcoming courses, where we go into more intermediate and advanced elements of building business systems, then the link is in the description if you want to click that. So take it easy. I'll see you in the next one.